Welcome to Chill Out. I'm Pam Chill, host of Chill Out, senior producers, and today's program is entitled The Life of a Dog in a Cat's World. And we're going to be discussing autism with a spectrum diagnosis, primarily in children. And my guest today is Marla Chattel. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, I said, please correct me.
Very close.
I'm going to give you a little bit about your bio, which you gave me. You're born and raised in Chicago.
Right.
You now live in Highland Park for over 30 years. You're married for almost 43 years. Congratulations. I assume same husband, right?
Same husband.
Okay. You didn't add them all together, right?
No, I was lucky enough not to have to do that.
All righty. Very good. And you have children?
One son who is a firefighter paramedic.
Excellent.
Lives in Chicago, works in Niles, and he's married to his soulmate.
Wonderful.
And they have produced for us a miraculously wonderful grandson who just turned a year old. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, and your degree is in education, but you never taught school.
Right,
which I guess a lot of people do have that and then go on to bigger and better things. And you worked briefly, you said, in drug abuse clinic, pursuing your MSW, and then you changed a lot of career paths. I was reading about your bio.
I did.
Yes.
It wasn't that I spent a short time in each one, but I probably had 3 at least distinct working patterns. So I switched to hospitality, and through an entry actually in food interest initially, and ended up managing the Women's Athletic Club on Michigan Avenue. Eventually then, after my son was born and I took a brief break, I was at home, and then I learned the computer design industry, and those things all came together when I went on to the next change, which brought me to the city of Highland Park with youth and senior services.
Excellent. And from there you went on to Lake Forest as well.
Yes. So it was an interesting experience to go from one senior center to the next, because even though in title and in mission they were very similar, but my opportunities to do things within the community were actually a bit expanded out there, and so it was a very interesting time for me. And I like to say I came into that field when I was 46 and left when I was 64. So
well, you
there
look
was
very good. I won't ask, but
well, retired now for 4 years. So.
Okay, which brings us to, you said you wanted to leave a legacy in your retirement, which I find astounding. That we think of doing that. So tell me a little bit about the book.
Okay.
The Life of a Dog Living in a Cat's World, and as we see a little cat sitting on his cat tree. And
looking a little bit smug and superior, and the dog looking, of course, a little bit uncertain.
A little bit timid, right. Okay.
So those, they are the representatives that tell the story. The idea of a legacy, I think I always had, from maybe young adulthood, the idea that it would be very satisfying to be able to leave something tangible at the end of my life, aside from the fact that my treasures in life are my child and grandson, daughter-in-law, but something that there was always just a drive for me somewhere in the back of my mind. And what happened with the book, shortly before I retired, I had run into a colleague who was commenting about being with her nephew, and talking about, it's just so challenging for the child, for the family sometimes, because he had Asperger's on the autism spectrum. Not everyone's familiar, but people who have heard of autism know that there generally is a major barrier to communication. They're not able to look someone in the eye and create relationships is one of the things, and at the most extreme. But Asperger's, which was first talked about maybe around 15, 20 years ago more publicly, is now being addressed at an early age with kids. Because before there were behavioral problems where at school or the parents didn't know what to do. Now there is early intervention, but there wasn't much available for the kids to see themselves. So her comment to me was, it was so hard being with him. It's like he is a dog living in a cat's world. And with that phrase, I thought, that is the book I'm going to write one of these days. I'd had experience through extended family members, friends whose kids and grandkids had all gone through a lot of the, again, challenges and struggles, and it just felt like that was the best way to describe it. And so I like to think of this as my second child, but with a 3.5-year gestation period. And it was born on Valentine's Day this year. So this book is really on a mission to reach kids who find themselves feeling different in whatever way it may be, because all children can relate to the fact that they want to join in. They sometimes don't understand why they would be looked at as different. And so the book has lessons that are really for every child, but the scenarios in the book focus on the sensitivities of kids with Asperger's. So very often it is communication issues. It can be sensitivity to touch. It can be as basic as texture of food. So a lot of the stories in there relate around incidents and experiences that kids on the spectrum would have and relate to. But the way that they're resolved is really where my mission is for those children, as well as children who might just know someone in their family, in their classroom, or kids who are wanted them all to be inclusive in every way that we can. And the more that I've talked about the book, and again, there was a lot out for parents, for clinicians, for teachers, but there weren't that many books for the kids to see themselves in the story. And that was really what I was looking to do. Now, it seems, as I say out loud to people, my book, the lessons in the book involve building self-esteem, self-confidence, how to ask for help when you need it, and socialization, which is critical for every age. So I even had someone who recently kind of reviewed the book for me say, it's a book that's not only for all children, it even has lessons for adults. We're all always looking to be connected and find ways to ask for help when we need it, just at the very basic level.
Okay. And what age group do you think the book is geared towards?
It was by a librarian determined to be between ages approximately 6 and 9, somewhere give or take of second grade. And I did have a chance to read it to a couple of second grade classes, and they were tuned in and did very well. A friend of mine read it to her 3 grandchildren, ages 8, 5, and 2 even, and they were enthralled. So it depends on where the kids are, but around second grade.
Well, it's a very interesting premise, and you know, when you said that, I just wanted to show briefly a photo. I don't know if you can go on the photo and do a little caption, but this is my grandcat and my granddog, and obviously the dog had been there for about 5 years, and all of a sudden it had a new companion, a little rescue cat, and the dog didn't know what to do, and everything centered around the cat, and he was literally a dog, now a cat's world. So that's him sitting at the bottom of the cat tree, which he learned how to go from the couch and jump into the cat tree. So instead of, you know, having his life as he knew it, he adapted.
Yes, well, it's an amazing picture that you have. It's exactly the opposite of the characters in the book, but same idea.
Same idea, yes, absolutely. So going back to the book, was this a long process? Did you take, you know, we're writing it every day?
Not every day, but it was a continuous process over, as I say, it took about 3.5 years from the very first draft till I had it printed, and decided to self-publish because I do a lot of volunteer work up at Ragdale. It's an artist community and retreat in Lake Forest. And listening to a lot of authors, I know that you can search for a long time sometimes to find a publisher. And I just felt with today's technology, it's easy enough to do. I thought, I've got the book. It's available to me to create it. And so I decided to go ahead and publish it on my own.
Well, you don't know where to land. I mean, I thought of it and I looked at it and I was thinking to myself, gee, this would make a really good animated film.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I get a lot of promotion. You know, when you publish a book, you get an ISBN number, which allows it to go into a bookstore, be in the Library of Congress, identified by its own ID number. And this morning I had an email that said, "Do you think your story could be turned into a movie?" I thought, I don't know about a whole movie, but I could see certainly something animated with lessons for kids.
I was thinking animated.
Yes,
I wasn't thinking
yes.
of an actual film, but more of an animated film.
Well, my hope is, like I said, my goal is to get it out as far and wide as possible. Who knows, maybe someday there will be a little stuffed, Duncan is his name.
Duncan, he's so cute, right. And you said he's an Airedale, right?
He's an Airedale, yes, which we had. And, you know, the process of the book, that I think everything was a learning process going along. So the writing, actually, I had the amazing experience of sitting at the computer and finding that my ideas actually did just flow in a way that although I'd always written in one form or another, it surprised even me. But it was kind of channeled almost. It felt wonderful and smooth. But then I learned that, as my editor had said, good writing is all about good editing. So many drafts of reviewing before you get to the end. And then I had the good fortune to find an amazing illustrator.
Oh, yes, it's very beautifully illustrated. You know, going back to the subject of autism and on the spectrum, how do you find clinicians reacting to your book?
I'm getting different responses from school social workers, and in that setting than I am a little bit from the clinicians. Sometimes the clinicians, I think, have so many of their own very specific tools, and this is maybe not quite as targeted, I'm not sure, with their audiences, but I originally was working with a school social worker right at Oak Terrace School, and she had, in fact, she's written one of the endorsements in the book saying what a great tool it is to work with kids, because the story has an empathy factor where the characters are interacting and learning how to really understand how someone else feels and how to get around the problems. And so it was endorsed by the executive director of the U.S. Autism Association, and then by school social workers, special ed teachers find it as a great tool. So I'm really working more toward getting it in the schools. The clinics per se, I have not had the same kind of strong response.
So, yes. Now going back to the special ed, I'm not that familiar with how they treat children on the spectrum. I mean, are they more isolated within the special ed, or are they brought into the mainstream of educational experience?
Typically mainstreamed. Again, it's what's very typical about children with Asperger's is very high intellect, but sometimes the primary thing that's noticeable is that their communication skills are incredibly limited. One of the things that's very characteristic is they really don't even have the ability to look someone in the eye, which is where most humans make all of their connection. It's just a trait. I can't explain it beyond that, but that's very common. And so the connection between them, sometimes there's a sensitivity to touch. So if kids were playing and jostling, they might be, or they might want to separate themselves. Too much noise and stimuli, too much activity around them. I even saw it happen with one of the groups that I read to at Oak Terrace. The kids were sitting on the carpet in front of me, and one of the girls who I'd been told actually has Asperger's was fine during the story, but as soon as the kids were raising their hands and there was a lot of noise and movement, she literally kind of crawled down in a little fetal position. It was just too much for her. So it's dealing with they'll be definitely mainstreamed, but usually are getting sometimes speech therapy. One of my friend's grandsons, he was diagnosed very young, so speech therapy, occupational therapy, not so much necessarily physical, but they get a lot of extra attention.
And how do the other children react?
Well, like any situation where I think you see someone that is maybe not fitting into the mainstream, there's always the potential for some bullying, I think, and that's why part of the book talks a lot about how to build self-confidence, how to ask for help if you're having a problem. Children can be, unfortunately, not always kind.
Right. They can be not kind, but sometimes you will, on occasion, find somebody who wants to mentor someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we look for the empathetic person, and, much to our good fortune.
And bring them into the crowd, know, because if they don't have friends, and then they can introduce, and they can go on and then do things together.
Well, and then there are a lot of situations where in therapy, in fact, one of the clinics that I visited, they do, as well as individual, they have the kids get together in small groups at a fairly young age. So again, there's a lot of effort to work with the kids in situations that just help them in their daily lives, as opposed to years back when nothing was being done, parents were sort of isolated. And the kids themselves didn't have any example to go by, so they didn't really know what to do. So now the therapeutic techniques have really advanced. So kids are being exposed to each other, often those kids that have the same problem, but then they are integrated into the classroom. So,
Does it help with brothers and sisters? Or is
absolutely.
Or is there more isolation being an only child?
One of the people that I know, even in a family that was 4 children and somewhat chaotic, the problem still existed, because you can have a lot of things going on around you, but if internally that is your orientation, that you're not connecting, you're just in your own little world, whether they are an only child or in a family, they can still kind of suffer the same circumstances.
Now, the parents, if they do have, other siblings, are they spending more time with the one sibling that needs more attention, or are they spreading it out among everyone?
Well, again, it's such
each family is different.
Each family is very, very different. And I know of several different scenarios. I know of a woman, she had been actually a student. I knew her as a student. Now she's a working adult, and in her family was a younger brother. And I believe in that case there was a lot of attention. She was mature enough to handle it very well, and I think even wrote something about it at the time. But they can get lost in the shuffle just as much as they can have the attention focused on them. So again, it's really an individual handling by the family, I think.
Right, or sometimes it could be too much attention.
Sometimes it can, and it can be
then it makes
disruptive.
Them too self-conscious and disruptive, and
right.
That they feel that their whole life is focused upon them and not everybody else.
And labels, like anything else with school.
Well, that I wanted to ask you, how do you counteract being labeled? It's very difficult, and that's a whole discussion probably within itself.
Yes, because again, when you're looking especially at a school situation, there are kids that are in and out of classrooms for special attention for a variety of reasons. Whether, and I have to say it's been a little while since I've been in an elementary school system, but I think the kids, they try to mainstream as often as they can and then provide the enrichment on the side. And how kids are going to treat someone who maybe is a little different from them. It might be just because they're a different race. It might be because they're a different, ethnic background. We have reasons to be diverse all over the place, and people's tolerance is what they learn at home. So it is, like I said, it's a lesson for everyone in how to be accepting. And I said there's a certain empathy. Try an empathy for that, for trying to teach them how to get along and be accepting.
Absolutely. You also talk about finding reliefs of stress. So do you want to speak a little bit about that, or?
You mean in regard to?
In regard to autism and in regard to the story. How did he deal with stressful situations?
Well, one of the things is to actually isolate themselves. And again, situations where there is too much activity, it's kind of getting to know themselves. And again, I think for all of us, if you find that there's something that is going on, it might be too much noise, it might be too many people around, they will usually separate themselves.
It's kind of like a trigger. You kind of know what is going to trigger that type of a reaction, and then you have to ease off of what you can handle and what you can't handle.
Right, and I think as they get older, there's more anticipation of it, but I think at a younger age, it's more a question of they feel it, this is too much for me. I know a lot of adults who also don't
well,
want to be in a room with it's anxiety producing. And so typically the behavior is, if it's unpleasant, it's too much, they will take themselves and find a quiet spot. One of the things that happens in the book, in the story, is that the dog finds comfort in his bed. He finds comfort with a blanket that is soft and cozy, which he finally combines the blanket and the bed. But when things are too rough and it's just the cat is sort of on the attack, or the kids and the noise in the family is just too much, he will take himself away, comfort himself. And again, it's another tool in the toolbox to be able to know when something is not right for you, what can you do to find that comfort.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned learning to ask for help.
Yes.
Know who to ask and when to ask.
Yes, yes. And again, I would say, as I look at life, I think that exists at every age as well, but for children, again, it might be the child themselves. In this case, there are representations of the dog and the cat's activities represent. So when there was something that the dog wasn't able to do, he looked around and saw, now how did the cat get everything that she wanted? How did that work? Well, she made a fuss, she meowed, she got her wishes known. So he would then discover, I can use my voice as well.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
so he would bark and speak up for himself, saying, this is something that I can do myself. I can actually speak up, and somebody's going to pay attention to me. And it's just a little bit of bravery that builds along with all the other confidence. But yes, just you need to know when it's time. It's like, I can't do this for myself. So what can I do?
Uh-huh.
Speak up.
And children are the same way.
Children are
yes.
the same way. Children are the same way. Sometimes adults need to be encouraged that it's okay for you to ask for something. You don't have to be completely independent all the time. We all need to know that it's the right thing sometimes. It's not a weakness. It's really a strength to say, I need help.
Right. You need some assistance. And then once you're shown how to do it, then
you're striving for the independence.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Everybody wants to be independent. Because I remember reading many, many years ago, going back into the book, is that when they had Hurricane Katrina, they said the only dogs that survived had cat partners, and they followed the cats out because they didn't know. They were very afraid, and they didn't know that they had to climb out.
Okay.
And then the cat kind of like said, okay, you can do this, you can do that. And then when they finally rescued them, like I said, there was always a dog and a cat together.
Very interesting, yeah. We think of them as being on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're not always there.
They worked together, or they maybe were buddies at home or whatever, but...
They found a way to work it out.
They did. Yes, wonderful. Absolutely. So I guess the same thing is with children. They find a way to do it, and... they help each other, obviously. Now, how does it work? Do you do any work with teens, or did any?
No, I am not so involved with that age group. This one, of course, is targeted to younger kids. From observation, usually there's just a slower maturation, emotional maturation. But many kids, as long as they're getting a lot of attention when they're younger, by the time they reach their teens and young adulthood, the goal is, and again, it just depends on where they fall on the spectrum. And that is the term now actually being used to not always Asperger's, but somewhere on the spectrum of autism. And some, again, are just incredibly successful adults, and as they grow and have experience. But in some cases, it's more challenging, and it takes them a while to get their footing. And there's not always a 100% situation where young adults are able to gain their independence at the same rate that other people would. So sometimes it's a dependency for the parents to carry on for some time into their lives, and
or sometimes they might have to carry on their entire life.
They might, and again, the tremendous advantage now is that there's so much awareness. Kids are being evaluated both in schools and by physicians at such an early age that I think the real hope is that there would be fewer and fewer people who have to struggle and suffer, because if they are observed to have a problem early on and it's faced with a lot of therapy, usually there's a tremendous success.
How early on are they really
this one little boy that I'm he was a year and a half, 2 years old by the time they knew. And they'd been looking for a whole variety of things. They weren't sure what was happening.
I'm sure they rule out medical reasons.
Well,
it's still a medical.
Well, that's the thing that I was thinking about before I came today is, I mean, this is a case unlike a lot of other conditions which can be, are treated medically. There's no medication involved. It's strictly behavioral therapy, and it's behavioral concerns. There really is nothing that is medical. They talk about whether it's inherited or not. There's a lot of confusion. There is not an absolute about exactly what causes it. One of the things that has been thrown around is whether immunizations.
I have heard about immunizations.
I think if I were to say anything here, I would want to say immunizations are incredibly essential for everybody's well-being, and there's been no solid proof that they cause autism. So despite a lot, there's a lot of confusion about it, there's a lot of discussion about it, there's no absolute medical proof that that's the case. So.
I know there have been many, many reports.
Yeah.
Many, many years ago, I think it was part of the pertussis virus that, that type of immunization.
People are always afraid of, I think, something that's new, and everybody wants an answer. Sometimes there isn't an easy answer, and that's sort of the case here, I think. It's a question of observation, realizing what the symptoms represent, and then approaching it really directly on those areas, and that is what is done with a lot of the kids. I mean, sometimes, as I say, it's as sensitive as the touch of a fabric on their skin, or whether they want to be touched by other people. It can be the texture of the food they're eating. So there are some real ultra sensitivities in addition to communication barriers. So I say within the story, there are just a lot of scenarios I hope kids would be comfortable with. So.
Now, where do you see your next? Are you working on a next book, or?
It's funny that you should ask me that, because I find after going through the adventure, and I consider it somewhat of a long adventure of getting to the point of the book being printed, one of the very first questions people tend to ask is, are you going to write another one? So at this point, I think my answer is, I'm thrilled to have this one. I'm focused on getting it into the hands of as many people as possible, and there may be another book, but at this moment, I'm kind of living more in the present. So
very good. I'm just going to give your information if people want to get in touch with you.
That'd be great.
Do you want to give your email? I'll let
yes.
You do it. Yeah.
So my email is my full name, Marla Schachtel, MarlaSchachtel@msn.com.
So for further information, they can obviously email you, and you can give contact information right on that. So you said that you are doing the next book. Well, I'd love to have you for the next one. And are you doing a lot of work with different charities with autism?
I've just started to make some inroads into Autism Speaks. There's an agency actually in Highland Park, Aspiritech, that I hope to contact. So I am looking at places. In fact, I found something very interesting that United Center is actually offering sensory bags to make it available for people, again, who would be so overwhelmed by the amount of noise and activity, for people who would maybe stay away from a venue like that. And now they are providing, I think, for kids and adults, headphones and a variety of utensils. So I'm trying to find all the other things I can connect with, and again trying to get into the schools with the book, so more and more kids can.
There's so many tools that you're really not aware of that can absolutely help. In our techie stage that we're in. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for appearing on Chill Out, talking about your book, The Life of a Dog Living in a Cat's World, and the autism spectrum.
Thank you.
I really, really appreciate you coming on and discussing it. And like I said, we will talk further when you have your next book.
Let's hope.